The first time I realized my marriage had become a lie, it wasn't because I found lipstick on a collar or mysterious text messages on a phone. It was because I saw my own wife standing in our backyard on a bright Saturday afternoon, smiling at another man in the exact place where we had buried a tiny wooden box filled with promises from our wedding day. While I stood frozen behind the kitchen window, hidden by the reflection of the afternoon sun, she wrapped her arms around him with a tenderness she hadn't shown me in years. In that single moment, 21 years of trust shattered so quietly that even the birds kept singing. By the time the sun rose the next morning, she had lost everything she believed she could never lose. Before we continue, if you believe kindness is stronger than hatred, forgiveness is braver than revenge, and hope can still exist even after betrayal, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs encouragement today, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys that remind us why the human heart never stops fighting for another chance. For nearly 2 decades, Alastair Mercer believed he had built the kind of life most people quietly wished for. He wasn't wealthy enough to own luxury cars or vacation homes, but he had something he considered far more valuable. He had a peaceful house in a quiet neighborhood outside Portland, a landscaping business that he had started with one borrowed truck, loyal employees who felt more like family than co-workers, and a wife named Colette who had once convinced him that soulmates were real. Every flower growing around their home had been planted together. Every fence board had been nailed into place by their own hands. Every tree carried memories of birthdays, anniversaries, and lazy Sunday afternoons filled with laughter. Neighbors often described them as the couple everyone admired. They attended community events together. They hosted summer barbecues every year. They smiled in every photograph. If someone had asked Alastair whether his marriage was perfect, he would have laughed and admitted that perfection didn't exist, but loyalty did. At least that was what he believed. Life had not always been gentle with them. 8 years into their marriage they lost their first child before birth, a heartbreak neither of them ever truly recovered from. Instead of tearing them apart, the tragedy seemed to pull them closer. They promised each other that no matter what happened, they would never allow grief or disappointment to destroy what they had built. That promise became the foundation of everything they did afterward. Colette eventually opened a small interior decorating business from home. She possessed remarkable talent. Her creativity transformed ordinary living rooms into beautiful spaces. Alastair celebrated every new client she gained. He proudly told everyone that his wife was the most gifted designer in the city. Whenever she doubted herself, he reminded her how far she had come. Whenever she wanted to renovate another room in their house just to test an idea, he happily bought the supplies after work. Watching her succeed genuinely made him happy. As the years passed, however, tiny changes slipped quietly into their routine. They weren't dramatic enough to trigger immediate suspicion. They simply felt unfamiliar. Colette became unusually protective of her phone. She began accepting more private consultations that somehow always required meeting clients away from home. Weekend lunches with friends became more frequent. She spent extra time choosing outfits even for simple errands. At first, Alastair blamed himself for noticing. He assumed she deserved independence and privacy. Marriage wasn't ownership. Love required trust. Still, something deep inside him whispered that the rhythm of their lives had changed. The whisper grew louder after their 20th anniversary. Alastair had spent weeks secretly building a handcrafted cedar pergola in the backyard. Every evening after work he measured wood, sanded rough edges, and painted each beam by hand. Beneath it he planted white roses because Colette once confessed they reminded her of the wedding bouquet her late grandmother had carried decades earlier. He imagined surprising her with breakfast beneath the flowers, believing the gesture might rekindle the closeness they seemed to be losing. When the morning finally arrived, he prepared coffee, fresh fruit, and warm pastries before inviting her outside. She smiled politely. She thanked him. Then she spent less than 10 minutes under the pergola before saying she had an urgent consultation with a new client across town. He watched her drive away while the breakfast slowly turned cold beneath the roses. That afternoon, he sat alone under the pergola wondering why the happiest moments in his marriage had begun feeling strangely one-sided. Weeks became months. The distance between them could no longer be explained by busy schedules. Conversations became shorter. Meals became quieter. Excuses became longer. One afternoon Alistair visited a local hardware supplier to collect fencing materials. While waiting for his order, he unexpectedly ran into an elderly customer named Graham who lived only a few streets away. Graham had always enjoyed talking far more than listening. During casual conversation he mentioned seeing Colette around town frequently with one of her decorating clients. Alistair smiled. He explained she had been expanding her business. Graham nodded thoughtfully before adding something that unsettled him. The older man admitted he assumed the younger gentleman accompanying her was probably her business partner because they looked unusually close. The comment lingered inside Alistair's thoughts long after he drove home. He desperately searched for innocent explanations. Perhaps they were discussing projects. Perhaps they simply laughed together naturally. Perhaps Graham had misunderstood. He refused to let suspicion poison 2 decades of marriage. Instead of confronting Colette, he bought flowers on the way home. She thanked him distractedly before disappearing into her office to answer another phone call. Days later, another strange event occurred. One of Alistair's employees accidentally loaded the wrong trailer and delivered landscaping materials to the wrong address. Alistair drove across town himself to solve the mistake. While waiting outside the property, he noticed a familiar SUV parked nearby. It belonged to Colette. The house wasn't listed among her scheduled decorating appointments. He considered walking inside. Instead, he chose trust once again. He drove away without saying a word. That evening she casually mentioned spending the entire afternoon shopping for fabric samples. Alistair looked into her eyes. For the first time in 21 years. He knew she was lying. The realization hurt more than he expected. Not because of the lie itself. Because of how easily it came. For several nights he barely slept. Every memory from the past year replayed itself differently. Missed anniversaries suddenly made sense. Secretive phone calls sounded suspicious. Weekend conferences felt less believable. Yet every morning he convinced himself he was imagining things. Love often fights against truth. Sometimes it fights until truth forces itself into the room. That day arrived on an unusually warm Saturday in early September. The landscaping crew had finished earlier than expected after completing a neighborhood project. Around noon Alistair decided to surprise Colette by bringing home lunch from her favorite Italian cafe. He even bought the lemon tarts she loved because they usually sold out before afternoon. As he pulled into the driveway, something immediately felt different. Her car was home. Another unfamiliar silver sedan was parked beside the garage. He assumed it belonged to a decorating client. Carrying the food inside, he called her name. No answer. The house felt strangely quiet. The back door stood slightly open, allowing warm sunlight to spill across the kitchen floor. As he stepped closer, soft laughter drifted through the screen door. It wasn't ordinary laughter. It carried a warmth he hadn't heard from Colette in years. Carefully, almost instinctively, he stopped before reaching the doorway. From inside the kitchen, the backyard came into perfect view through the wide glass windows. There, beneath the old maple tree they had planted together during their first year of marriage, stood Colette. Facing her was a tall man dressed casually in rolled-up sleeves. They weren't discussing decorating plans. They weren't exchanging paperwork. She reached for his face. He pulled her closer. Then she kissed him. Not briefly. Not awkwardly. Comfortably. Like two people who had practiced goodbye kisses 100 times before. Alistair couldn't breathe. The paper bag slipped from his hands. The lemon tarts rolled silently across the kitchen floor. Neither of them noticed. His entire world narrowed into one impossible image. The woman who once promised forever had chosen someone else. And she had chosen to betray him in the very backyard where they had built every dream they once shared. Alistair remained motionless behind the kitchen window, unable to understand how his life had unraveled so completely without making a sound. The afternoon sun reflected against the glass, hiding him from view while giving him the clearest look at the scene he wished he had never witnessed. Colette rested her forehead against the stranger's shoulder, smiling with a happiness that seemed painfully familiar. It was the same smile she had worn years ago when they painted the nursery they never got to use. It was the same smile she had given him when they celebrated paying off the mortgage. Seeing that expression now, offered to another man, hurt more than the kiss itself. His first instinct was to rush outside, demand answers, and let years of buried confusion explode into anger. Instead, something inside him simply broke. He realized that if he confronted them in that moment, he would only become another emotional scene they would eventually explain away. He wanted the truth, not excuses. Quietly, he bent down and gathered the scattered pastries, placed them back into the torn paper bag, and slipped out through the front door without making a sound. He drove for nearly an hour without knowing where he was going. The roads blurred together as memories flooded his mind. Every anniversary. Every sacrifice. Every overtime shift he had worked so Colette could grow her decorating business. Every promise they had whispered beneath the stars years earlier. None of it made sense anymore. Eventually he parked beside a small riverside park where he often ate lunch during difficult workdays. Families were enjoying picnics, children chased ducks along the shoreline, and elderly couples sat quietly on benches enjoying the sunshine. Life continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened, yet Alistair felt as if the entire world had stopped turning. He reached into the glove compartment and found an old notebook he used for business estimates. On the first blank page he wrote one sentence. "Today I stopped believing what I wanted to believe." He stared at those words for several minutes before closing the notebook. That evening he returned home just before dinner. The silver sedan was gone. Colette greeted him with surprising warmth, apologizing for missing lunch because a client meeting had lasted longer than expected. She smiled naturally while setting plates on the dining table, speaking about paint colors and furniture deliveries as though the afternoon had been completely ordinary. Alistair simply watched her. For years he had believed he could always recognize honesty in her eyes. Now he realized he had been looking through love instead of truth. He didn't accuse her. He didn't mention the backyard. He simply nodded and listened while every sentence she spoke sounded rehearsed. Over the following week he became quieter than ever. Instead of confronting Colette, he focused on observing. He noticed how often she smiled at messages before deleting notifications. He noticed unfamiliar perfume lingering inside her SUV. He noticed invoices for decorating projects that didn't exist in her business records. Small details, once meaningless, now formed a pattern impossible to ignore. One afternoon while organizing paperwork for tax season, Alistair discovered several large transfers from their joint savings account into a separate account he didn't recognize. The amounts weren't enormous individually, but together they represented nearly $80,000 over the previous 18 months. His confusion quickly turned into concern. The money they had spent 2 decades saving for retirement had slowly disappeared without his knowledge. Still refusing to act impulsively, he scheduled a meeting with the family accountant, Evelyn Rhodes, a woman who had handled their finances for nearly 15 years. She carefully reviewed every statement before quietly explaining that the transfers had all been authorized using Colette's online credentials. There was nothing illegal about them because the account belonged to both spouses, but the pattern was unusual. Evelyn looked across her desk with genuine concern. She asked whether everything was all right at home. Alistair wanted to answer yes. Instead, after a long silence, he admitted he no longer knew. Evelyn gently encouraged him to speak with a respected family attorney before making any emotional decisions. She explained that understanding his legal position didn't mean he had given up on the marriage. It simply meant he was protecting himself while searching for the truth. For the first time since the afternoon in the backyard, Alistair felt something other than heartbreak. He felt clarity. Over the next several days he met privately with an attorney named Graham Ellison, who patiently explained every financial document. Together they discovered that several investment accounts had quietly been emptied. A small vacation cottage inherited from Alistair's parents had recently been listed for sale using paperwork requiring both signatures. One signature wasn't genuine. It had been forged. The discovery shocked even the attorney. This was no longer simply about infidelity. Someone had crossed a legal line. The attorney advised Alistair not to confront Colette immediately. Instead, he recommended securing financial records, protecting remaining assets, and allowing investigators to verify everything first. Alistair hated the idea. He had spent his entire marriage believing honesty solved problems. Now honesty alone could cost him everything. Weeks passed as professionals quietly assembled evidence. During that time Colette continued living normally, unaware that the truth was steadily uncovering itself. Then another surprise emerged. The mysterious man from the backyard wasn't merely someone she had fallen in love with. His name was Preston Hale. He had accumulated significant gambling debts over several years. Public court records revealed lawsuits from creditors and multiple failed business ventures. Investigators discovered that much of the missing retirement money had been used to cover those debts through indirect transfers. Alistair sat silently while reading the report. He realized Colette hadn't simply betrayed their marriage. She had gambled away their future. The hardest moment, however, came a few days later when he visited the backyard alone during a sunny afternoon. Beneath the maple tree stood the small wooden box they had buried on their wedding anniversary many years earlier. Carefully digging through the soft soil, he uncovered it for the first time in 2 decades. Inside lay faded photographs, handwritten promises, dried flower petals, and 2 letters they had written to each other before getting married. Alistair unfolded his own letter first. It spoke about protecting her heart forever. Then he opened Colette's. In careful handwriting she had written that loyalty would always matter more than comfort because trust, once broken, could never be fully repaired. He couldn't stop the tears. Not because she had broken those words. Because once upon a time, she had truly believed them. The next morning arrived bright and clear. Alistair woke before sunrise, made coffee, and quietly packed a small suitcase. He wasn't running away. He was moving forward. By noon every remaining shared account had been legally frozen pending investigation. The forged property documents had been reported. The sale of the inherited cottage had been immediately suspended. Colette's access to several business funds connected to their joint finances was temporarily blocked under legal advice. When she returned home that afternoon expecting another ordinary day, she discovered locked accounts, legal notices waiting on the dining table, and a letter written in Alistair's unmistakable handwriting. It contained no insults. No threats. No anger. Only truth. He explained that he had seen everything in the backyard. He knew about Preston. He knew about the money. He knew about the forged documents. He wished her healing, but he could no longer allow her choices to destroy the life he had spent decades building. By the following morning, the comfortable future Colette believed would always be waiting for her had disappeared. The retirement savings were under investigation. The property sale had collapsed. Her decorating business was losing clients after financial irregularities became public during the legal proceedings. Preston, overwhelmed by his own debts, vanished without leaving an address. The dream she had risked everything for disappeared almost overnight. And for the first time in 21 years, Colette stood completely alone. Colette had spent months believing she controlled every outcome. She believed she could slowly pull money away from their future without Alistair noticing. She believed she could live two separate lives, one as the admired wife in a peaceful neighborhood and another with Preston, the charming man who constantly promised her excitement and freedom. Most of all, she believed that if everything ever collapsed, Alistair would forgive her the way he always had. She underestimated the quiet strength of a man whose patience had finally reached its limit. The following afternoon, bright sunlight filled every room of the house as Colette sat alone at the dining table surrounded by unopened envelopes from banks, attorneys, and clients who had suddenly cancelled ongoing decorating projects. Her phone, once constantly buzzing with appointments, remained silent for hours. Word traveled quickly through the local business community. Although no one knew every detail, they knew enough to distance themselves from controversy. She called Preston repeatedly. Every call went directly to voicemail. She drove to the apartment he had rented across town only to discover a moving truck parked outside. The landlord informed her that Preston had left early that morning after ending his lease unexpectedly. No forwarding address had been provided. For several minutes she simply stood on the sidewalk under the afternoon sun, unable to accept what had happened. The man who had promised to build a future with her had disappeared the moment life became difficult. The drive home felt longer than any journey she had ever taken. Every traffic light forced her to sit alone with thoughts she had avoided for months. She finally admitted something she had refused to acknowledge while chasing excitement. Preston had loved what she could provide. Alistair had loved who she was. By the time she reached the house, the difference had become painfully clear. The backyard looked exactly as it always had. The white roses still bloomed beneath the cedar pergola Alistair had built with his own hands. The maple tree still cast its familiar shadow across the grass. Yet everything felt different because she now understood what she had destroyed. She walked slowly toward the maple tree and noticed freshly turned soil. Curious, she knelt beside it. The small wooden box that had once rested beneath the tree was gone. She immediately remembered what had been inside. Their wedding letters. Their promises. The tiny silver coin they had tossed together before burying the box as a symbol of never giving up on each other. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. For the first time since beginning the affair, she wasn't thinking about herself. She was thinking about the man whose heart she had broken. Days turned into weeks. Alistair moved into the small cottage owned by his older sister while the legal process continued. Every morning he still opened his landscaping business before sunrise. He still greeted his employees with kindness. He still helped elderly customers carry heavy bags of soil to their cars. The pain remained, but he refused to let bitterness define the rest of his life. His employees noticed the sadness behind his smile but also something new. Peace. He no longer carried the exhausting burden of pretending everything was fine. One Saturday afternoon the community organized its annual neighborhood garden festival, an event Alistair had helped coordinate for over a decade. Friends encouraged him to stay home, believing the memories would be too painful. Instead, he arrived early carrying flower arrangements for the entrance. He refused to allow someone else's choices to steal the parts of life that still mattered. People quietly approached him throughout the afternoon. Some simply shook his hand. Others offered awkward words of encouragement. No one asked intrusive questions. Kindness surrounded him in ways he had never expected. Across the festival grounds, Colette stood alone near the entrance. Many neighbors recognized her but avoided conversation. Not because they hated her, but because they didn't know what to say. She had never felt lonelier. Eventually she noticed Alistair helping a young volunteer repair a damaged flower display. Even after everything he had endured, he remained patient, calm, and generous. Watching him from a distance hurt more than any legal notice. She finally understood that she hadn't lost her marriage in one afternoon beneath the maple tree. She had been losing it every time she chose deception over honesty. Gathering every ounce of courage she had left, she slowly walked toward him. Alistair looked up as she approached. Neither smiled. Neither looked angry. They simply looked tired. Colette's eyes filled with tears she no longer tried to hide. She admitted that she had spent weeks searching for someone else to blame. She blamed loneliness. She blamed routine. She blamed growing older. She blamed the excitement Preston offered. But every excuse eventually collapsed beneath one unavoidable truth. The choices had been hers. No one had forced them. She confessed that Preston had convinced her they could build a glamorous future together if she invested enough money into his business ideas. Every promise turned out to be another lie. The retirement savings had vanished into gambling debts she never knew existed. By the time she realized the truth, she had already destroyed the one relationship that had been genuine. Alistair listened quietly. He interrupted only once. He gently explained that forgiveness and reconciliation were not the same thing. He no longer hated her. In fact, carrying hatred felt heavier than carrying grief. He wanted both of them to heal. But healing did not erase consequences. Trust, once shattered, could not simply return because someone felt regret. Colette nodded. She already knew. She wasn't asking him to come home. She wasn't asking for another chance. She simply wanted him to know that she finally understood the depth of the pain she had caused. They stood together beneath the warm afternoon sunlight for several silent moments before wishing each other peace. As months passed, the legal proceedings ended respectfully. The remaining assets were divided fairly according to the court's decision. Colette sold many personal possessions to repay debts and slowly rebuilt her life through honest work, renting a small apartment and accepting modest decorating jobs. It was not the glamorous future she had imagined, but for the first time in years, every dollar she earned came from integrity rather than deception. Alistair chose a different path. He expanded his landscaping company into neighboring towns, creating jobs for young people learning the trade. He also started volunteering one afternoon each week helping widows and elderly homeowners maintain gardens they could no longer care for themselves. Working with flowers reminded him that even after the harshest winter, life quietly found a way to bloom again. Nearly a year later, while planting fresh white roses at a community memorial garden, Alistair found himself smiling without forcing it. The pain had not disappeared. It had simply stopped controlling him. He realized revenge had never truly been about making Colette suffer. Life itself had delivered every consequence through the choices she made. His greatest victory was not watching her lose everything. It was refusing to lose himself. Before we end, we'd love to hear from you. If you had been in Alistair's place, do you believe forgiveness is possible after such a betrayal, or are some broken promises impossible to repair? Share your thoughts in the comments because your perspective may help someone facing a similar struggle. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. As the afternoon sun settled gently over the blooming gardens, Alistair looked across rows of flowers he had planted with his own hands. He finally understood that while betrayal could destroy the life you planned, it could never destroy the person you chose to become. Sometimes losing everything you thought you wanted is the only way to discover the peace you truly deserved all along.